Okay, so we had talked about so far the last part that how we are connecting the utility of say different cohorts of people with respect to amount of public good or public expenditure, right? Now, as we know that the decisions are collective decisions, and when a particular elected representative votes or say proposes increase in expenditure of some public good, it should reflect that of his or her constituency, right? Now, these opinions, like suppose, take for example, there are almost 550, if I'm not mistaken, member of parliaments in India. Then, and I have no clue about the number of senators in the US parliament. Must be somewhere there or even more. Now, some of them might reflect more spending on, take for example, development agenda, take for example, health and education. On the other hand, there can be another set of elected representatives who will be more pressing on some military spending. Right? So look, when it comes to individuals, first we had that problem. Individuals, they select a representative which best aligns to their requirements. Now, when these elected representatives are trying to vote for or rather press upon particular budget on a particular public provision, they will also have conflicts. Now, all these divergent views has to be somehow taken care of, else the system will not work, right? Now, when it comes to dictatorship, you know what is dictator is, then you must understand that it is the views or the preferences of the dictator which will dominate. So it is very easy if the system has a dictator. Similarly, I'm not saying it is the particular country. To take for example, I'll not say them as dictator per se, but yes, they are the sole leaders of their nations. We had and we still have a couple. Take for example, uh, if you take certain uh, countries like Brunei, or take for a countries like the Emirates of Saudi Arabia, where you have the prince or the king, or you have North Korea, where you have Kim Jong. So there, while making decision about what is good for the society, it is their individual decision which will get reflected. It is even a little more uh, complicated, but still less problematic in countries like China, where you have a single party system. So it's the view of that party which will get reflected in their policy making. But when it comes to a country like India, this is very, very problematic. We have, when we're young, like when I was a school kid, and we had this common essay that we had to write. And it was like common across the batches, unity in diversity. The problem is we do acknowledge the diversity. But when it comes to public policy making or allocation of public money in different public goods, you have so many divergent views so many divergent positions, right? So there is no easy solution when we talk about a democracy. Now there are different types of voting mechanism that has been proposed. Like for example, there is something called unanimity voting, right? Unanimity voting, by definition, you have to understand that the decision should be unanimous. If I want to take a decision, if I want to vote for a particular agenda, the outcome should be unanimous. Now, even under a democratic structure, that type of rule exists. Take, for example, when it comes to the Security Council of the United Nations, we have the 5 countries there, the permanent members. Who are the permanent members? The US, the UK, China, France, and Germany, right? Those are the 5 permanent members. Now, whether a particular decision is to be taken or not has to be ratified by each and everyone. If one pulls out, then the decision will not be taken. Take, for example, the decision to make India a permanent member of the United Nations Security Council. There were points of time where all the 4 countries, except China, have given a positive vote for India. But China opposed it and said if you have to give India as a permanent member to the UN Security Council, then you have to also include Pakistan. So that is their political. But that type of a voting system, and hence, as a result, India is still not a permanent member. Only those 5 members are still there. So that type of system is still there, not only in, say, United Nations Security Council, it also is there. Take, for example, when we talk about the European Union, whether to give access Macedonia or say Turkey access to the European Union as a member of the European Union, all the existing members should be unanimous. So it's like giving entry to a club where all the existing members has to unanimously vote to allow the accession. Else it will not be done. A second type of voting, which is most common across the world, is something called a simple majority voting. Majority voting is the simplest because you acknowledge the diversity, but for all practical purpose, you cannot have all the resources to follow all the suggestions or to incorporate or implement all the possibilities. Hence, you have to shortlist a subset of all the possibilities from where the implementation will come. And hence, what you do a very simple rule is I go with the majority. The moment the majority of the voters select a particular agenda, I will go with that agenda. And beforehand, you declare that I am following a majority voting rule. Now, majority voting has a particular very serious flaw, and we'll come to that. It's not about that in a majority voting, you do not take care of those who voted against the majority decision. You can always go for a redistribution because what is happening? The majority of the people are better off with, say, agenda A, and that is why they have voted for agenda A. There was an alternative B, but the minority of the people have voted for agenda B. Now, when majority voting is taken care of, A wins. So you implement A. Now you can understand the majority people are better off with A and only minority of the people are worse off. Now you can always implement a redistribution where these A number of A voters compensate the B voters, because by number A voters are much stronger than the B voters. So suppose 100 have voted for A and 50 have voted for B. So 100 people are better off, 50 are worse off. So it's easier for 100 to compensate 50. So the possibility remains, that redistribution possibility remains. This is what we call a compensation. You can always compensate the B voters and still, so that B voters become neither better off nor worse off. But because B voters are less in number, the cohort of A voters, even after making compensation to B voters, as a whole will still be better off, and hence the society will be strictly better off. And we're talking about meritocracy, right? So I'm not talking about, but majority voting has a different but serious, and we'll come to that absolutely shortly. The other option is something called a two-thirds majority. Until and unless two-thirds of the people have voted for an agenda, the decision will not be taken. So the winner must get two-thirds majority. In majority and two-thirds majority, it's basically 51%. Anything more than 50% gives you a majority vote. And two-thirds majority voting, those type of majority voting exist, but they're very few, because the two-thirds rule is a little bit ad hoc. Why two-thirds? Yes, the redistribution becomes even easier. That's right. But again, the simple majority and two-thirds majority are basically majority voting. Now, by definition, what is a majority voting equilibrium? That the majority voting equilibrium tells you that there is one alternative or one agenda that will win if you contest that against any other alternative. The flaw that I was talking about is here. The majority voting equilibrium might not exist at all. In certain case, and I'm giving you a very simple example now, and you'll find that if the majority voting equilibrium exists, it is very easy to implement. But there might be cases where it might not exist at all. Take, for example, three alternatives. A, which is more spending on children healthcare. B, reducing deficit. C, reduction of taxes. Now you have three individuals. For each of these three individuals, they have different preference rankings. And that is the essence of what we call the public choice. We do not assume ever that all individuals are alike. All these complications are generated because of the very real life logic that individuals are different. So let's assume that voter 1 prefers healthcare for children, 2 deficit reduction, 2 tax reduction. Voter 2 prefers tax reduction more, 2 children healthcare, 2 deficit reduction. And you have voter 3 who has another preference pattern. B to C to A. Right? Now, let's first take a vote between A and B. So these three voters are given the option to vote either A or B. So voter 1 will obviously vote for A. Voter 2 will vote for A. Voter 3 will vote for B. 2 prefers A to B, while the third one prefers B to A. Here, A is a winner. And now you pitch this winner against the third remaining alternative, C and A. B has been removed from the picture now because when you have started the voting thing, you have set the agenda where A will be pitted against B first, and then the winner will be pitted against C. Now, A to C, look, voter 2 and voter 3 prefer C to A. So even A is a winner in the first round, C becomes the final. Now the problem starts. A has won against B. So winner pitted against C. C has now become a winner. Now let's pitch C with B. Two people prefers B to C. Only one prefers C to B. Now B will become winner. When you pitch A and B, A is a winner. A and C, C is a winner. C and B, B is a winner. So it's what we call the circularity, or what we call cyclical. So when you have these three options or alternatives, and you have three different preference structures, in this very simplest form, you can see with majority voting, clearly there is no winner. So in this particular example, where you have three voters and these three alternatives, and the three voters has the three types of preference rankings, there will not exist any majority voting equilibrium. So this is the biggest problem of majority voting. It might not exist. Now, you just do the opposite thing. Let's change the ordering. Let's put B and C together first and put the winner against A. Now with B and C, look on the right hand box, I kept the preferences unaltered. B wins, C wins, B wins. So B is the winner. So B beats C, then A, if you put against A, the winner B, A will beat B. Now again, to find the ranking between A and C, you find C is the winner. Then again, take C, challenge it with B. B again beats C. That was the original outcome when you started with the game. Now, if you continue this, irrespective of setting the agenda, what is the agenda? A, B, C are alternatives or candidates. Agenda is which pair to be voted first. Irrespective of the agenda that you take, if this preference structure remains, then the cyclicity problem will not be resolved. And this is what we call the majority voting paradox. Now, there is a simple solution to it. So, in game theory parlance, we'll set that the actual game is this voting game. But there is a pre-game where you set the agenda and fix the agenda. Take for example, what is agenda? Which pair to be voted first or pitted against first. So if you want, look, the game becomes very simple. If anyone who has the power of setting the agenda wants C to be the winner, what he will do? He will take A and B first and then pit it against C. If he wants A to be the winner, he will pit B and C first and then take the winner and pit against A. So setting the agenda becomes very crucial. So agenda is nothing but, as you can see, the order in exactly the sequence in which the vote occurs. Now take for example, what about the voters? They also know that. Look, the solution or the domain in which we are right now is nothing but what we call strategic interaction. Now take for example, there is something what we call a strategic voting on part of the voters. So far, what we have assumed that whenever A and B or B or C or A are voted, the voters will vote according to their preference. This is what we call truthful voting. But there is something called strategic voting. Take for example, voter 1 knows that the agenda has been set. A and B are to be voted first, and then the winner will be pitted against C. But look, he knows the moment it is done, and suppose it's only the two round, A and B are voted against each other. So first round A wins. Then the winner A is pitted against C, and C will beat A. Now look at voter 1. C is the least preferred alternative to him. So when in the first round, the voting comes where A and B are pitted against, it is better for him not to vote for A, but he will vote for B. Why? Voter 2 and voter 3. Voter 2 will vote for C, will vote for A, but voter 3 will vote for B. So instead, I just not being truthful to my actual preference, I vote for B. What happens when the A and B voting is done? B gets one vote from voter 1 and one vote from voter 3. A loses. So B becomes the winner. Now when B and C are pitted, then he replaces the truthful. B to C, B to C, and C wins only with voter 2. So in the second round, B becomes the winner. And B is still better than C for voter 1. If he had been truthful in the first round, C would have been the final winner. But he voted strategically in first round, and B becomes the winner. Look, this actually happens. Take, for example, all of your voters must have voted at least once in your life, and you have seen how voting is done. And if you're interested to cast your vote, obviously you can always say, no, I don't feel like giving a vote, but being a responsible citizen, it's better to always cast your vote. Sometimes that one vote matters. Not necessarily in your parliament elections, because of the 130 crore population that we have, but maybe in your local level, that one vote might matter. So whenever we see, take for example, we means people who had been uh, in the voter list of say West Bengal or say Odisha for a long time. What happened? Odisha has been at the state level ruled by the Biju Janata Dal with Chief Minister Navin Patnaik. For Bengal, it's Mamata Banerjee for a very long time. And now, and if you have seen, I do not know whether you follow or not, but there used to be one person called Pavan Chamling. Anyone knows who is that person, Pavan Kumar Chamling? Please raise your hand.
Sikkim,
Yes. Why he
Yeah.
is famous? Why Pavan Chamling is famous?
he hasn't lost an election. Like he has been elected as chief minister from last 2 or more than 2 decades.
Yes, Laksh. Pavan Chamling, he is only the last election he lost. Last time he lost. But he had been the concurrent chief minister for 5 terms for 25 years. So, and when it comes to Sikkim, any news that you get, any negative news that you get from Sikkim is that of maybe landslide. So, natural calamity. But law and order and everything is absolutely beautiful. One of the best in the country. One of the best in the country. Now, these people, the Sikkimis, or the people from, say, take for example, Bengal or Odisha, when it comes to assembly election or state assembly election, state election, they might be having a completely different preference order of supporting the regional party. Take for example, I am from Sikkim. I want to vote for Pawan Chambu. I know he has done really good for the state for a very long time. But when it comes to parliament elections, Pawan Chambu, hardly anyone knows him there in Delhi. So if I vote for him, suppose he is a contestant, his party is also fighting the central elections, why should I vote him? My vote will go completely waste. Because at the center, I need to vote for a party which has national presence. So look, my voting is completely different when it comes to state assembly and when it comes to choosing a member of parliament for our central election. This is exactly what you see in real life. And this is exactly in game theory parlance we call strategic voting. And now look, the entire game changes if the person who had set the agenda, suppose voter 1 can set the agenda. He will want A to win. So what he will do? He will just put B to C first round, followed by the winner and A. And he will go for truthful voting. But if voter 1 sees that voter 2 is the agenda setter, he knows C will become the winner, which is the least preferred outcome for voter 1. So what he will do, when voter 2 is the agenda setter, voter 1 in round 1 will behave in a strategic manner and not vote truthfully. And look, this is nothing but logic, pure logic and pure strategic thinking. This is nothing but game theory. Very simple game theory. And you don't need to understand game theory or the theories related or the solution mechanisms of game theory to understand this. It's very simple. It's only ranking. Now, this part should be absolutely clear to you. So I am reiterating. When we start with what? A preference order like this of 3 individuals across 3 alternatives. If there is no agenda set, then there does not exist any equilibrium. Now, to achieve an equilibrium, agenda has to be set. So 2 alternatives has to be pitted first round, followed by a second round where the winner of the first round is pitted against the second, the last alternative left. Now, this setting of agenda itself is a pre-game. Just look into this preference structure. So if voter 1 gets the power of setting the agenda, what he will want? He will want A to win. If he wants A to win, he will take B and C in the first round. So B will win and he will pit the winner against A. A will win and he is happy because his most preferred option has become the majority voting equilibrium. But when he sees voter 2 has the power of setting the agenda, what he knows? That voter 2 will set the agenda in a different way. The agenda will be A and B in the first round, followed by the winner, which is A, with C, the last option, in the second round, and C will become the winner. Now, what can voter do? Voter 1 can do at that situation. He has seen that voter 2 is setting the agenda. So what he will do, he will not remain truthful in the first round. Instead of A to B to C, he prefers A to B, but he still prefers B to C. So B is still better than C. So in the first round, he will vote for B. And what will happen? He will get at the end B as the final outcome, such that voter 3 will be the maximum happy person, but voter 2 will be the least happy person. Voter 1 is still better off because C is not the final winner. So in the first round, voter 1 will go for strategic. Complication is everyone can, all out of these 3, everyone can do this. Everyone can go for a strategic. But to give you the idea that voting and the final outcome depends on 2 things. One, how you set the agenda. 2, whether you stick to truthful voting or strategic voting. Now, this small discussion that we had so far tells us that we need to answer 2 questions. 1, are there any particular voting rule or rules that will ensure that a determinate outcome is there? And second, how can we create the circumstance or environment under which a simple majority voting will yield a determinate outcome? Now, answer to the first question. The voting paradox tells you that whether you go for majority voting, normal majority voting, or unanimous voting, or say 2/3 majority voting, as long as those, look, I'm still, to prove up the point, I'm still taking that particular preference structure. 3 people having 3 preference rankings. So, irrespective of the voting rule you check, cyclicity will be there. So, it is very difficult to rule out the paradox. But yes, the voting rule cannot, you don't need to change the voting rule. So whether it's majority voting or 2/3 majority or some the unanimous, you can change the circumstance. So the circumstance I'm talking about, the first circumstance was how to set the agenda. Second is, I'm not changing the majority voting rule, but what I'm changing is the pair-wise voting and ranking of that pair. So who will be voted first, again whom? And then the winner will be voted against the third alternative. If we do that, then you can have a determinate outcome. Now, the question, all these questions finally gets led to.
I didn't understand, how will you ensure determinate outcome? What will you change in the circumstance?
Look, what is a voting rule? Voting rule is whether I follow a majority voting, unanimous voting, or 2/3 majority, right? Those are called voting rules. But what is the circumstance? Or what is the environment? Environment is if I keep all the 3 options together at the same time. Let's go back, okay? Let's have a relook in the preference structure. Just focus on the box. Or let's use this particular part. Take for example, I use the voting rule unanimous. Is there a determinate outcome? No. No equilibrium. Voter 1 will prefer A, 2 will prefer C, 3 will prefer B. And there is no one particular alternative among A, B, C in which all 3 will be unanimous. So, equilibrium does not exist. Take all the 3 together. Use simple or 2/3 majority. Cyclicity will be there. The voting paradox will be there. So there is no voting rule that necessarily gives you a determinate outcome or an equilibrium. Now, I want a determinate outcome. I cannot change the voting rule. Can I change the environment? Can I change the circumstance? Yes. Set agenda. Take any 2 alternatives as the first pair and go for the first round. Then take a winner out of the first round, pit it against the third alternative, left. So I'm not changing the voting rule. Majority voting is still majority voting. What I'm doing, instead of taking ABC together, I'm taking any two alternatives as a pair and pit them in the first round. Take a winner, pit it with the final alternative, get a winner, and stop the voting process there. So that's the environment or circumstance I'm talking about. So look, let's go to the statement. Voting paradox cannot be resolved through voting rule. But you can create the circumstance or environment in which majority voting yields clear decision. Yes. Just assume that you take A and B in the first round, take the winner, pit it with C in the second round, and stop the voting there. C will become the winner, and that's a determinate outcome. So I have not changed majority voting rule because only majority voting rule would have been unable to give you a clear answer. But I have added an environment or a circumstance, which is agenda. And the agenda is A to with B in the first round and winner with C in the second round, and then no more voting. So there is no third round. Once you create the circumstance like that, you get a determinant outcome. Clear?
Yes, so then one more question I had.
Yes, yes.
So when you were talking about strategic voting, you said A will change his vote and not be truth. A will change the vote and not be truthful. So over there, are we assuming that A is aware of everyone else's preference orders? Like, because for A to make that decision of not being truthful, A must be aware that what are the preference orders of voter 2 and voter 3, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. You're correct. Because look, there are certain assumptions with which we have to start the analysis. And the analysis will not require the final analysis will not require all these things. But to start with what we do, that this is common knowledge. This part is common knowledge. Take for example, why it is common knowledge. Let's assume these voters are not the initial voters, but these voters are the member of parliament. Voter 1 has been selected from state of Florida. Voter 2 has been selected from the state of Alaska, and voter 3 has been selected from, say, California. Now, let's assume that A, B, C are agendas like A is something to do with the environment to fight harsh winter. So environmental policy to fight harsh winter. So the member or the senator from Alaska will have that as the first preference. Let's assume B as law and order and criminal rights. The person from Florida will have that in the top agenda. And take, for example, urban planning is the third alternative. So the person from, let's assume that's New York. So he will go for that one. Now, when I'm an MP from Alaska, I know that the MP of Florida will have winter as the last option and crime rate as the first. So urban will come second. The member from Florida will know that, okay, the Alaskan MP, winter will be the top priority, and maybe a planning will be the least priority because there are no people. It's vast emptiness of lands. And this is how almost everyone can rank every other person preferences. So even if voter one does not disclose his ranking, the other one can approximately guess it. What we start with, we are not going into that guessing game because that is beyond the ambit of this course particularly. As you can understand, you can give a probability distribution function, and that will be the domain of the Bayesian equilibrium. And sorry, but I cannot go or delve deeper into the Bayesian structure right now in this course. But if you are interested, please, all of you, I request you can have a look into what we call the Bayesian Nash equilibrium or the Bayesian equilibrium or Bayesian perfect equilibrium under any game theory course. Okay. So you make a guess and you attach certain probability distribution. Here what we do, that we make it simple and say that suppose these rankings are visible. Now, if the rankings are visible and you know who gets the chance to set the agenda, then whether you will remain truthful in your voting or strategic in your voting, that becomes very clear. The problem with that is somehow different. So when voter one becomes the agenda setter, he will remain truthful, while voter 2 or 3 might play strategically. So look, there are multiple layers in this game. In fact, the first stage of the game will be who becomes the agenda setter. The second stage is depending on who is the agenda setter, you can identify who will go for strategic voting. And the third stage is the final outcome or the final voting. So basically, we're talking about the 3 stages. So the first and foremost, which we are not discussing here, is out of these 3 voters, who will set the agenda. That is the first stage of it. Now, once that is being decided, you can understand just looking into this preference structure, who will play strategy. Now, the problem is, let's try to answer your question from a different angle. Suppose I can see only this and not the other two, and which is true for everyone. So no one can see or observe what the other person is doing or what the other person is having in his preference relationship. Then look, there is no meaning of playing strategy. In fact, that is also game theory. Take for example, I'm just giving you a clue. Or how many of you have ever seen an auction, including an auction in IPL, in the television? Yeah. And almost everyone must have seen some good old Hindi movie where an auction is happening over an antique which gets stolen And hence the hero, who is the police inspector, comes into play. Very standard 1960s, 70s movie structure. Now the question is, when it comes to auction, what will be your quotation? Obviously, in the movie category, the type of auction that you see, someone says, okay, I give 10 rupees for this item. And the person says, no, 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 I can value it more than that, I give 12 rupees. And this process goes on. So bidding, cross bidding goes on till someone comes up with a bid which no one else can match. And the item gets, what I'll say, uh, sold to that person, the highest bidder. Now the question is, there is another type of auction which is more relevant and more real life. We don't go buying antiquities every day. Or the type of auction that I'm talking about is basically tender process. All of you must know tender process. What is a tendering process? Anyone who does not understand, please raise hand. Look, no hands. So all of you know what is a tender. Okay. Yatharth, you do not know what is a tender. Tender is something, suppose IIT wants to construct a wall or construct a building. It publishes a tender that a building of this structure and this thing is to be constructed. The bidders should come up with their quotes. So the builder who gives the least amount will get the tender. Similarly, let's think of the spectrum auction. The government of India or Air India, the government of India says Air India will be given to the person who is the highest bidder. Now the use of a particular bandwidth will be given to the company who gives the highest bid. Now all these tenders, bids, these are all sealed. You cannot know what the other is doing. Now I think I'm getting close to the answer that you wanted. So case one, the type of auction where the cross bidding is there. I can see how much you have quoted and hence I can go up if I want to. So your preference is revealed to me. Then the case is very simple. That is exactly the case that we have discussed so far. That voter 1, 2, 3 can see each other's preference ranking. But there can be a second option where these voters might not able to see others, knows only his or her preference ranking. Now I will relate it to this what we call sealed bid auction. You get only one chance to give a quotation or give a bid. And there was this person, once again, another Nobel laureate. His name was William Vickrey. He came up with a mechanism which tells you very simply what will be the best option for a sealed bid type of auction. Because in a sealed bid, you might not exactly reflect the true valuation of the good that you have in mind. So how to force you to give the maximum? So I am the auction designer. I am the seller. You are the buyer. So there are three buyers. Buyer 1, 2, 3. I want each of these buyer 1, 2, and 3 to quote the highest possible amount taken. Give me. So you should be truthful. And this is what we call Vikram's truth serum. And the mechanism is absolutely simple. It's child's play. Go for a sealed bid auction. The winner have to pay the second highest price. So suppose Laksh, Avinav, and Priyansha. These three are the bidders. I am the seller of a particular item. You can only quote once, and no one knows what the other one is quoting. But I want to sell the item at the highest possible price. That will be my profit maximizing motive. So I want Laksh, Avinav, and Priyanksha to quote the highest possible for each of them. Because Priyanksha, Laksh, and Avinav might have different valuation for the same thing. Suppose Laksh values that thing at 100 rupees. Avinav thinks the maximum he can pay for it is 150 rupees. Priyanksha thinks the maximum she can pay is 110 rupees. The question is, I would like to sell it to Avinav for the highest he thinks he can give, which is 150 rupees. How to get that from me? I say, all of you submit a quotation in sealed envelope. The person with the highest quote will be the winner, but he has to pay the second highest price. Now, Avinav might think, if I quote anything less than 150, the second highest bidder will get it. So is there an incentive for me to quote something more than 150? No, absolutely not. If somehow I am the winner, then I might have to pay something more than 150. Suppose the second highest bidder has given a quotation truthfully of 160. I think the maximum valuation of this thing should be 150. So if I quote anything more than 150, it will not work. Because suppose if I quote 155, then I might have to pay 152, which is being quoted by Laksh, because Laksh can give a quotation of that sort. Then I am the winner. I have to pay 152, but then I have a net loss of 2 because the value of the good for me is 150 and I'm paying 152 for it. So it's best for me to give a quote of 150. So Avinav will be truthful. Same will be Laksh, same will be Priyanka. So when I do not see others' preferences, it's best for me to remain truthful. The strategic voting will be ruled out. So that's the difference.
Sir,
Yes, Priyanksha?
uh,
Sorry?
is-
Sorry? Your voice is breaking, Priyanksha.
uh, hello.
Priyanksha, sorry, I could not hear anything from you. Is it possible for you to drop a text in the chat box? I'm waiting.
Sir, am I audible now?
Yes, absolutely clear.
So, sir, said that in conventional auctions that I have seen, the bidders like they put the price in front of everybody, so every other bidder knows. So, if someone is aiming for getting maximum profit, that would be a much better idea because then everybody knows what the other person is thinking, so they'll
No,
try
Priyaksha.
to.
No. You're making a mistake. Suppose what you are saying is not an auction. What you are seeing is not the maximum price I can fetch for that item. Suppose I think the value, that minimum thing that I should get for selling this item is 150 rupees. So I will put a banner 150 in front of it. That is what you call a reservation price. So the item will not be sold below 150. But that does not say it won't be sold at rupees 200. Take for example the Air India case. Why it has not been sold so far? Because till now the government has not found a bidder who has reached to that reservation price set by the government. If you think the price of an item is 150 and the seller puts it, I go and buy. What is the difference between that and purchasing something from the shelf of Spencer? When I purchase something from Spencer, suppose I pay for the MRP, there are no discounts. Then is that auction? No. What you are seeing in an auction, when the price is given in front of it, that means the item will not be sold below that price, and we call it a reservation price. And if I can see who else is bidding, suppose there is a price quoted in front of it written 150. Suppose it's a small thing, absolutely small thing. I know the seller will not sell it to me below 150. Cool. Now, a lot of people have gathered around that thing. Everyone wants to buy it 150. If there is no one to buy, it will not be sold. If there is only one person and no one else is interested in that item, and the person is willing to purchase that thing at 150, the seller has no other choice but to sell it at 150 because there are no other takers. And he's at least getting his reservation price. But suppose there are two. The auctioneer will say, I will sell it to that person who gives me the highest. Now you two will bid among yourself. But the problem is there you can see the opponent who is bidding with you. So you can understand how much he will bid. Because you will stop, after which you think the price becomes more than the value of the good which you are attaching to that good. Suppose your attachment, you think the maximum price that you should give for that item is 200. So you will not go beyond 200. Now, if the opponent goes above 200, you have to accept it is being sold to the opponent. His willingness to pay was higher than yours. But suppose there is a donation box in front of it, or a box with a place where you can place a chit, and it says, put your name, phone number, and the maximum amount you want to pay. The item will be sold to that person who gives the highest quotation at a price equivalent to the second highest quotation. Work out the logic. Very simple. You do not have a reason to quote anything less than 200. Because you have thought already that the maximum I should give for this is 200. You will not quote anything more than 200. That's trivial. You will also not quote anything less than 200. Because then someone might get it. Someone quoting 205 or someone quoting 200. And suppose 200 minus epsilon you quote. Though you think you could have max go up to 200. So anyone else quoting 200 will get that and pay 200 minus epsilon. Then you have lost it. You could have afforded that epsilon. So there is no reason for you to underquote us. So you become truthful. And this is what we call Vickers truth serum. Sealed bid auction, and we call it second price auction. But yes, as Priyansha pointed out, in real life auction, you do see a number in front of it, but that's not the price at which it will be sold. That's the what we call a reservation price, below which it will not be sold. So you have to quote at least that price to participate in that auction. But look, with this simple auction design, and you relate it to this simple preference ranking, if I cannot see the preference rankings of my opponent, then irrespective of the agenda in which it is set, it is better for me to remain truthful to my preference. Because I cannot see these. Suppose I am voter 1 and I'm just unable to see voter 2 and voter 3's preferences. What I know, A and B will be voted in the first round, B and C will be voted in the second round. Without having any knowledge about what our other preferences are, I'll remain truthful because I do not have an option other than being truthful. But if I can see, depending on how the agenda is set, I will either be truthful or strategic. Correct? Okay. Please tell me, Priyanksha, are you okay with the explanation? Is it clear to you now?
Yes, sir, it's fine. Sir, but you said that the like whatever the thing is, it would be sold to the highest bidder, but at the second highest price.
Highest price,
So why
yes.
is that?
Because look, by that, suppose I just say highest bidder. And you know that if you quote 200, you have to pay 200. You might take a chance of putting the value at 198. Here, what is happening? You're putting it at 200 because you know you have to pay 200 minus epsilon if you are a winner. So that epsilon amount will be your surplus.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So that's the logic. It's very simple. Very simple
Yes,
auction.
sir. Yes, sir. I got it.
So what happens with that second price sealed bid auction? The seller will not be able to extract the highest possible willingness to pay, but the second highest. But he makes everyone to be truthful. Truthful in the sense, everyone indicates the maximum amount he or she wants to pay for. And this is the way a lot of auctions happen in the world, particularly online auctions. And just hold on for a second. Please hold on for a second. Hello. একটু ব্যস্ত আছি, আপনি 12টাতে চলে আসুন। 12টাতেই বেরিয়ে যাবো, 12টাতেই বেরিয়ে যাবো, 12টা খুব বেশি হলে 12টা পড়বে। ওকে, না না নিশ্চয়ই চলে আসুন। Sorry, I had to receive this call. Now, the next thing. What happened? Yeah, this we have done. The next thing is to understand that if you keep on continuously pitting each other evenly, like pairwise or whatever way, you cannot have a determinate solution. Then there is no meaning in this voting cycle. So, can there be any other mechanism that can solve for it? Now, theoretically speaking, people came up with something what we call the ideal political mechanism. So it might be a voting, the particular type of voting that might, or a particular mode of selection that will have certain features. The first important feature is transitivity. From the society's point of view, if A is preferred to B, B is preferred to C, then A is preferred to C. This is the condition which majority voting lacks. Look, this transitivity is meant for the aggregate, not for individual. For every individual, it is transitive. Also. But from the societal point of view, if A is preferred to B and B is preferred to C, then C should be preferred to A. But we have proved that absolutely wrong when we left with A, B, and C. Take for example, when A and B are pairwise voted, A is the winner. A and C are voted, C is the winner. Now C voted with B, B is the winner. So now what would have been transitivity? When A and B are voted, A is the winner, which means from a societal point of view, A is preferred to B. Similarly, C is preferred to A. Then C is preferred to A is preferred to B, then C should be preferred to B. But when we talk about the majority voting, you see B is preferred to C. The cycle comes. The majority voting lacks this transitivity condition. The second is a non-dictatorial choice. You just make a dictator, and the dictator will follow his preference, will not consider whoever else is thinking. So suppose out of these three individuals, voter 1, voter 2, voter 3, voter 1 is a dictator. He will say A is preferred to B, B is preferred to C. This is the societal choice. This is exactly what the nation wants. So A is the best option. Let's impose B. I am dictator. If you want to counter me, you will be eliminated. Simple. So there is no cycle. But what happens? From the societal point of view, an individual preference shall never mimic that of a society. Everyone's preference in the society should be considered while taking a decision. So you need to have a democratic structure. Independence of irrelevant alternatives. So suppose when A and B, these two alternatives are voted against each other across all the voters in the country, their preference for C and B, C and A should not interfere. So if you have a decision to make, say for example, between whether to construct a swimming pool or a tennis court in your house, or sorry, in your locality, we're talking about social. Then a third alternative, which is a new library, should not hamper your decision. So when you talk about swimming pool and tennis court, should keep the choice between swimming pool and tennis court. Unrestricted domain. This mechanism which you are talking about should work irrespective of the number of people involved, irrespective of the set of preferences, irrespective of the range of alternatives. So there is no problem. So if any particular mechanism can satisfy these four characteristics, then we'll say we have a fail-proof system or a foolproof system. The problem is a number of systems have been thought about so far, but all of them fails at least under one criteria. And this is where, for example, rank order voting. So A, B, C, three alternatives, you rank them. Give numeric rank 1, 2, 3. Now take this alternative A. What does it get? A gets 1 from voter 1, 2 from voter 2, and 3 from voter 3. B gets 2 from 1, 3 from 2, 1 from 3. So this is what I'm saying, you assign a rank. Now when you add them together, the one with the least score should win. But the problem of rank order voting is it fails with that independence of irrelevant alternatives. So when you're talking about your preference between 1 and 2, alternatives A and B, your preference for C is also being taken count of. And Prof. Arrow came up with the mathematical proof of what we call Arrow's impossibility theorem. And it says there is no rule that would satisfy all the desired characteristics. So the question is, most of us keep on asking or keep on saying these two things. The government is inconsistent. It is doing that here and the opposite there. And take for example, why can't the government set up a priority and act on that? Like set up an agenda and act on that. But the problem is when we individuals make statements like that or raise questions like that, We fail to understand one simple thing. Government is not an individual. We are treating as if it is an individual. So even the voters, they fail to understand the mechanism in which the government works. Now, Arrow's impossibility theorem tells you that yes, the government can come up with absolutely determinate solution. Just make the government a dictator. Make him an individual. And the question is, why we should study Arrow's impossibility theorem at all? The answer lies in the proof of Arrow's impossibility theorem. And this is exactly what we'll do right now. Because the beauty of Arrow's impossibility theorem tells you in some way that if you have a democratic structure, it is very difficult for the government to maximize social welfare. If you have a dictatorial structure, then social welfare can be maximized easily, but the problem is the dictator will only maximize his or her own preference or utility rather than the social welfare. Now the question is how we can prove something as complicated like that. We're talking about politics, and also I'm trying to say we can prove it mathematically. Very easy actually. Look. Let's consider two individuals only and three alternatives. So individual 1 and 2 and their ranking of or their preferences over defined over three alternatives x, y, z. Now what we are ruling out that individuals 1 and 2, they do have determinate preference or strict preference. They are not indifferent. So I am not indifferent between x and y, or you are not indifferent between y and z. And how do we denote it? X, P, I, Y means for individual I, alternative X is strictly preferred to alternative Y. And look, we are still in the domain of the axioms of rationality. So the preferences are complete and transitive. Now, there are three alternatives. So there can be, if you do the permutation thing, there can be 6 ways a particular individual can order these three. Take for example, he can say x is preferred to y or to z, or x to z to y to x to z, and so there are 6 options, right? You can work them. And same for individuality. So basically, you can have 6 cross 6, so 36 different possibilities, or what we call preference profiles. And how do we depict it? Like this. Individual 1 and 2, 1 and 2, 1 and 2. So there are 6 options and choices for second. What are the numbers? So the first cell, let's take the first cell. Both individual 1 and 2 are preferring x to y to z. First row, second column. Individual 1 prefers x to y to z, but individual 2 x to z to y. Right? So look, for each row the preference of individual one is fixed, xyz, 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 so on. Only that of individual 2 is changing. For each column, the preference of individual 2 is kept fixed. That of individual 1 is changing. Any question with this preference or preference profiles? Are you all with me to understand the box? Take for example, take fourth row, fourth column. Cursor is right there. It means I'm talking about a possibility where individual 1 prefers y to x to z and individual 2 prefers y to z to x. Right? So this particular, what we call the preference profile. So two individuals, three alternatives, and we're talking about all the possible combinations of preference values. Right? Done. Now what we need to do is find whether there exists or not a particular rule to transform each of these cells into a social preference relationship. And this is what we call, it's named after Professor Arrow, we call it Arrow's social welfare function. And Arrow is still now the youngest recipient of Nobel in economics. And it is absolutely simple. Now, what we are just now add couple of preference relationships, what we call the social preference relationships. So R, when we write R, it means a social preference relationship, which means when we say X, R, Y, look, there is no individual or any subscript, unlike X, P, I, Y, where X is preferred to Y by individual I. Right? We did it. We defined it just shortly. Unlike that, there is no subscript here. If I write X, R, Y, means X is socially at least as good as Y, which means it can be either X, P, Y. So the society, or in this case, these two individuals together, prefers X to Y, or you can write it like that, X are Y and not Y are X, which means X is preferred to Y by the society as a composite and Y is not preferred to X. That means we have to understand one more thing, which is social indifference. Remember, we had said not a single individual has indifference. He can either prefer X to Y or Y to X. He is not indifferent between X and Y. But look, take for example a box like this, which is second row, first row, second column. First row, second column. Let's think about Y and Z. For individual 1, it is Y P1Z. For individual 2, Z P2Y. So among Y and Z, 1 and 2 are diametrically opposite. They do have their strict preferences. But the society, one person saying Y is preferred to Z, another is saying Z is preferred to Y. The society can be indifferent. So when I'm saying XPY, that means X is preferred to Y and not Y is preferred to X. when I'm saying x is indifferent to y, x I y, then both x are y and y are x. Correct? These are definitions. Now, let's go back to the characteristics we talked about. Completeness and transitivity. So either x are y or y are x must hold. And if I have x are y and y are z, then x are z. So by this characteristic I must have, if I have x are y and y are z, that means x are y means not y are x, and y are z means not z are y. So by transitivity I must have x are z and not z are x. This is the transitivity part. Completeness part is, I can either have, when I talk about the two alternatives, I can have either x or y or I can have y or x. Universality. This arrow social welfare function that you might say define is irrespective of what the individual preferences are. So your formulation will not mimic that of a particular individual. Irrespective of what you believe, what other people believe, the welfare function will hold. Pareto consistency. So, take for example any pair x and y. If both the individuals 1 and 2 prefer x to y, take for here the first row, first column, both preferring x to y, then we'll say x is socially preferred to y. So I can write it like this: x p I y and x, rather not I put I just make it specific, individual one. This one is subscript xp to y. So let me put it in a bracket. Then it will imply that xpy, right? Correct? So this is what we call Pareto consistency. Now, non-dictatorship. What is dictatorship? If you say for a particular individual I, if xpiy implies that xpy, so my individual preference means that is the social preference, irrespective of the preference structure of J, then we'll say I is a dictator. So this should not happen. Clear? Sorry. Now, independence of irrelevant alternatives. So when you are having a different thing happening somewhere else, suppose something is happening to Z or a new alternative W has come, your initial pair of alternatives X and Y, that ranking does not get changed. So when you are talking about X and Y, only X and Y, something about Z changes or some new W has come up somewhere else. But your initial preference structure within X and Y, that does not change. We call it independence of irrelevant alternatives. Right? So now, from those 4, now we have made it 5. Adding what? The Pareto consistency. And this becomes critical. Well, let's assume the Pareto principle first. You have that table in front of you, and then you apply Pareto principle. So what will happen? Let's consider a cell which has XYZ and XZY. So X is preferred to Y by both, and X is preferred to Z by both. When we talk about Y and Z, only then there is a conflict. But I can replace these values of the cell by saying that X is preferred to Z irrespective of the individual, both the individuals together, X is preferred to Y and X is preferred to Z. Right? Now when you check this particular table, take the first row, first column. X is preferred to Y, Y is preferred to Z, X is preferred to Z for both. So X P Y, Y P Z, X P Z. Second column, first row, X P Y, X P Z. But among Y and Z, we cannot make any statement. Look, Y P Z, Y is preferred to Z by both. X P Z, X is preferred to Z by both. But between X and Y, we cannot make a statement. Similarly, you do it for all the boxes. And what you get is something like this. So converting the original preference profile to accommodate the Pareto principle. So now look, certain elements have vanished. My focus has shifted away from certain cells with all the blanks. That means there are look 6 possible profiles where you cannot have any social preference structure. But for all the other 32 boxes or 32 cells, you will have at least one social preference structure. Now, let's apply the independence of irrelevant alternative. Suppose when person 1 prefers X to Y to Z and 2 prefers Y to X to Z, which means both are preferring X to Z, both are preferring Y to Z, but individual 1 is preferring X to Y, individual 2 is preferring 2 to X. Let's add look, you can do exactly the opposite also. Let's say to come up with a choice rule. When both have X preferred to Z and Y preferred to Z, but individual 1 prefers X to Y and individual 2 prefers Y to X, When you say XPY is a thumb rule. This is a welfare function you are defining. This is a thumb rule that you are generating. For both y is preferred to z and x is preferred to z. That is coming from Pareto principle. But when those two are along with one more thing, individual 1 prefers x to y, individual 2 prefers y to x. Then somehow you say under this condition I declare a social welfare function which says x is preferred to y. Now erase this particular characteristic, then demands which condition? It demands that whenever you have this x is preferred to y by individual 1, y is preferred to x by individual 2, you implement x is preferred to y by the society irrespective of how these individual 1 and 2 rank alternative z. Now, similarly, what we do certain similar definitions. YPX, y to x and x to y by individual 2. You say y is preferred to x. Or you can also say x is indifferent to y, depending what you want. Because you can define a welfare function the way you want. And we start with something. And we can start with anything. You can just start with the exact opposite also. That will not make any difference. So YPX will hold, say, when y is preferred to x by 1 and x is preferred to y by 2. So look, in this type of welfare function, what you are doing, you are giving weight to individual 1 and inverse weight to individual 2. Because if yp1x and yp2x is there, then by Pareto principle itself y is preferred to x. But suppose, take for example, a box like this. This one, the first row, third column. X preferred to z by Pareto principle, y preferred to z by Pareto principle, but x and y exactly opposite. So now you want to give some social welfare definition or welfare function which says that if a situation like this happens where individual 1 prefers x to y and individual 2 prefers y to x, I will say the society prefers y to x to y, irrespective of what is their preference about z. Take for example the fourth column, first row. Y is preferred to z, x is preferred to z, Pareto principle. But x is preferred to y by individual 1, y is preferred to x by individual 2. You say, I follow the same rule. Then x is preferred to y by the society. And look, that does not depend where z is being ranked, because z is ranked third by 1 and second by 2. Why are you doing it? Does not make any difference. You can say when this thing happens, what will have? You can always write when x is preferred to y by 1 and y is preferred to x by 2, you can say y is preferred to x by the society. Will not make any difference at all in the final understanding of the theorem. You are just ad hoc. First, you apply the Pareto principle. You have these relationships, so there is no confusion. Now you use this independence of irrelevant alternatives and you come up with certain preference ranking through a particular welfare function you think fit for the society. Now when you do that, let's think about rewriting that box we had in front of us. Like if x is preferred to y by individual 1 coupled with yp to x, you will write xpy, and similarly ypx. For xpy, use a cross sign, ypx, use a zero sign. So basically what you are doing, you are trying to do this in a xy plane. And if you look at the box right now, for the blanks, xy rankings will not change. We don't have a arrow welfare function defined over those boxes. But for anything which is marked either by a cross or zero, you exactly know x means by your defined preference structure, the ad hoc defined preference structure. The zero means ypx, the cross means xpy. And you can do a very similar thing when you talk about the xz coupling or the yz coupling. There are three couples, right? xy, xz, and yz. Now it's already. Please give me 10 moments, then we'll sort it out. Now the question then we have defined ad hoc, defined this welfare function saying these things. Right? This was by definition. This is not coming from Pareto. Someone might say, okay, you are just completely doing it wrong. You are just giving it 1% of preference. I'm saying, okay, just hold on. You just think about what I'm doing. You just do the reverse, the result is reverse. Nothing else will happen. But I have a different thing to prove. I am not saying that this should always be applicable. I'm saying let's try with this particular preference structure. And then reduce those 36 preference profiles into certain cohorts. So one cohort is this, second cohort is this, third cohort is this. Now the question that I have defined, is this definition foolproof with all the 5 things that I have done? So basically what we do is not a direct proof. It is a proof with negation. We will prove now that this type of defining welfare function does not satisfy the at least one out of those 5 criteria. So I know it should be complete and transitive, universal, Pareto consistent, and independence of the relevant alternative. Now, if I follow all these out of 5, I follow 1, 2, 3, and 5, then obviously the fourth characteristic, non-dictatorship, fails. How? Look at the profile. The first row, that second box I started. We had xpy and xpz. Now, when we talk about that, I already have from the Pareto thing XPY and XPZ. So what are the three other alternatives which can couple with this fact? This is fact. So how can I have a complete social preference already? XPY, XPZ, this is true. I cannot alter it. It is coming from Pareto principle. Because in that particular cell, if you look, original cell, where is that? Yeah. For both, X is preferred to Y and X is preferred to Z. So the society must be preferring X to Z and X to Y. So there is no doubt about it. I cannot tamper with that. So what is the other possibility? Either YPZ or ZPY or YIZ. Along with these two. The first two, look, XPY and XPZ, are true. I cannot change them. They are beyond any question. But remember, what about the relationship between Y and Z? Individual 1 is preferring Y to Z, individual 2 is preferring Z to Y. So when it comes to society, either Y is preferred to Z or Z to prefer to Y, or I can still have Y and Z are indifferent. The society is indifferent between Y and Z. No, I don't think we can complete it today. So, okay, on coming Wednesday, we'll just complete this part and we'll keep the rest of the session for any doubt that you might have. I will share the entire slide with you so that you can have a look. Till the end, I had another like 6-7 slides. The rest of the proof is there only. The negation part is only there. So that I will do in the next lecture. And today I'll just call it a day. It's been a long 2 hours, almost 2 hours. And now what we'll do, we'll just do the proof. The negation part is only left, just 5-6 slides left. And then keep the rest of the 1 hour for any doubt that you might have. This is for next Wednesday. And then next Thursday, we have the second test. And regarding the compensatory lecture and other things like my providing with you the solutions of the last examination, this will be done. Particularly solution will be given to you earlier. But the compensatory class we can have after the second class test. So there is no hurry. So that's, I will stop here. So now I am ready to listen anything that you have in mind. So if you have any doubt, any other thing, please go ahead. Please go ahead. If you have anything in mind, please go ahead.
Sir, when we looked at the independence criteria, then we took the preference of the first one, like gave more weight to the preference of the first one. So aren't we like considering it like a dictatorship when the first has more?
Exactly that will prove. Exactly. Remember, when I said the structure of the proof, I said, now I have started with the Pareto principle. After that, I have ad hoc decided certain rule and then test this new welfare function, which is obviously consistent with Pareto, but added with some welfare definition for the society. Can this type of rule clear all the 5 requirements, meet all the 5 requirements? We'll see. Except for the dictatorship, everything will be met. And that negation part proof is only met. But you are absolutely correct, Sagar. Absolutely correct. If we follow all other characteristics like transitivity, completeness, universality, Pareto, independence from irrelevant alternatives, then the dictatorship will come. And that's the exact proof of Tarot's impossibility theorem. And this negation part is only left, which I think you can easily logically deduce. But mathematically, or this preference logically, you can actually see. It's very simple. Yes, I are absolutely correct. So any other question? Any other doubt or anything else? Okay then let me stop recording.